Hayes lived quietly in Cedar Creek, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's business, yet somehow no one really knew her. She rose before dawn each morning, slipping on her worn slippers and brewing coffee in the modest kitchen of her brick bungalow. The aroma of dark roast filled the air as she opened the blinds to watch the sleepy town wake. Children on their way to school waved at her and she waved back, smiling gently, a simple gesture that masked decades of secrets she had carried silently. Her neighbors saw a woman of routine, calm, and unwavering politeness, a woman who never caused waves, never drew attention, the kind of person who could sit on a porch reading for hours without anyone questioning her presence. She worked at the Cedar Creek Public Library, a job she had held for nearly 15 years. Patrons knew her by name, often stopping to chat about the weather or recommend a new book. She knew everyone's stories yet never shared hers. Behind the desk, her fingers moved deftly over keyboards and books, organizing archives with meticulous care. It was a life of order, quiet, and predictability, which suited her perfectly. Even her small garden, where roses and hydrangeas bloomed in careful rows, reflected the meticulousness with which she lived. Had friends, of course, quiet, loyal companions who liked her calm presence, but she was fiercely private. No one knew that before Cedar Creek, before mornings of coffee and evenings spent with a book, she had lived a life that seemed pulled from the pages of espionage novels. That past, though long buried, had shaped her every decision, every instinct. Every glance and gesture carried the weight of experience few could imagine. It was a past she had left behind, yet it lingered invisibly in the lines of her hands, the steadiness of her gaze, and the subtle precision with which she moved through the world. Evenings were her favorite. She would sit on the porch in a rocking chair, cup of tea steaming in her hands, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. Dogs barked in distant yards, the occasional car passed along Main Street, and she would let herself relax fully, breathing in the cool air. Her neighbors thought she was a simple woman with simple pleasures, unaware of the extraordinary resilience and intelligence hidden beneath. Occasionally, she would catch herself smiling at the irony of it all, how someone who had once walked through danger and darkness now measured her days by the quality of light at sunset. On weekends, sometimes visited the local, a place where the aroma of fresh bread and espresso mingled with the chatter of locals. She would nod politely to familiar faces, order her usual black coffee and a slice of lemon loaf, and settle in a corner with a book. To anyone observing, she was unremarkable, even mundane, but had learned long ago that the ordinary was the safest camouflage. The quiet life allowed her to be invisible while the world spun recklessly around her. In Cedar Creek, she could finally be Hayes, not a name on a list, not a story classified, just a woman who liked tea, books, and the soft hum of a peaceful town. Yet even in this ordinariness there were moments when the past flickered, a shadow in a passing car, a word on the radio, a subtle glance from a stranger. She never lingered, she never acknowledged them. Cedar Creek was her sanctuary and she guarded it fiercely. Hayes had crafted this life with care and it was exactly what she needed, quiet, safe, and above all, ordinary. But as she sipped her tea and watched the sun dip below the horizon, a tiny unease stirred in her chest, an instinctive reminder that the extraordinary might not be done with her yet. Hayes approached the terminal of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport with the same deliberate calm she carried everywhere. Her carry-on was small, unremarkable, and contained only the essentials: a tablet, a notebook, a few personal items. Travelers bustled past, suitcases rattling, children tugging at parents' hands, glued to their devices. Moved with purpose, yet her pace was unhurried, measured. She had flown countless times before, and each step felt like a familiar ritual. Security was uneventful, the machines scanning without incident. She offered polite smiles to TSA agents and continued, blending seamlessly into the stream of travelers. Once past the gate, she took a moment to study the bustling terminal. Flight 319 to Washington, D.C. was scheduled to board in 20 minutes, and the line already stretched long. Sharp eyes noted each passenger, each crew member, every subtle shift in movement, a habit ingrained from years when observation could mean life or death. She sipped her coffee, savoring the warmth as her thoughts drifted to the mundane meetings, presentations, the mundane hum of life she had chosen. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a flicker of unease tickled at her senses. Something in the air was off, though she could not immediately place it. Boarding began and she joined the line with practiced ease. Passengers chatted lightly, exchanged greetings, and struggled with carry-ons, allowed herself a small, polite smile here and there, maintaining the appearance of complete normalcy. Flight attendants greeted each traveler warmly, their professional demeanor masking the stress that often came with full flights. Noticed one attendant pause, glance at the manifest, and then glance back at her with a faint flicker of surprise. She frowned briefly, shrugging it off as fatigue. Perhaps the early hour had thrown them off. She settled into her assigned seat, by the window in row 9, placing her bag neatly in the overhead compartment. The hum of the engines grew as passengers buckled in. gazed out the window at the expanse of tarmac, the planes glinting under the rising sun, and allowed her thoughts to wander. She reflected on the ordinary life she had carved out in Cedar Creek, the quiet mornings, the library's stillness, the evenings on her porch, and felt a fleeting sense of gratitude. Life was simple here. She had wanted simplicity, and she had it. Yet instinctively, she felt the world was about to intrude. A subtle tension, almost imperceptible, prickled at her awareness, the kind she had learned never to ignore. As the cabin doors closed, the pilot's voice announced their expected departure time. Tightened her, adjusted the headrest, and settled into her seat. Around her, passengers engaged in mundane conversation, children fidgeted, and laptops opened with the familiar click of keys. Everything appeared normal, yet the slightest irregularity in the rhythm of the airport and flight seemed amplified to her trained senses. Flight attendants moved deliberately down the aisles, ensuring compliance with safety protocols, and noticed one attendant lingered a second longer at her row, scanning her carefully. She arched an eyebrow subtly but said nothing. The plane began taxiing toward the runway, engines roaring to life with a controlled power that reverberated through the cabin. Inhaled calmly, but her fingers itched slightly, unused to such tension in ordinary circumstances. Outside, she glimpsed a squadron of F-22s on a distant runway, engines idle yet gleaming ominously. For a heartbeat, she thought she imagined them, but her instincts refused to let her dismiss the sight. Something unusual was happening. Someone somewhere had recognized her. She took a deep breath, centering herself. This was still, she reminded herself, an ordinary flight. She would make it ordinary as she always had. Passengers settled in, unaware of the eyes now watching them from above, unaware that the ordinary woman in row 9 was anything but ordinary. Sipped her coffee, scanning the horizon through the small window. Something was coming. She did not yet know what, only that her past, long buried, was stirring, ready to collide with the present. High above the heartland of Texas, an unexpected blip flashed across the NORAD radar. Red, insistent, and alarming, it refused to align with any scheduled flight. Operators exchanged tense glances, fingers poised over controls. Protocols initiated automatically, sirens barely audible over the hum of machinery. A code word, crisp and urgent, echoed in command centers across the network. Unidentified aircraft, intercept required. Within minutes, fighter jets roared to life on nearby air bases, their engines screaming a warning to the skies. Each pilot strapped in, senses sharpening, adrenaline surging. Captain Daniel, seasoned and disciplined, gripped the throttle of his F-22 with a quiet intensity. His wingman mirrored every movement, scanning the radar screens, each muscle alert. The unidentified plane's trajectory was irregular, yet there was no visible sign of aggression. Still, military training left no room for hesitation. They climbed into the sky, the sonic roar of takeoff reverberating in their chests, the clouds parting as they ascended at impossible speeds. Ground control relayed the situation with clipped precision, issuing coordinates and height, every second ticking like a metronome toward confrontation. Inside Flight 319, Hayes remained calm, seated by the window, unaware of the events unfolding above. Passengers fidgeted, some glanced nervously at the sky visible through small windows, mistaking the distant shadows for commercial traffic or sunlit clouds. The hum of ordinary conversation masked the tension that gripped the military above, yet instincts, honed over years she never discussed, whispered a warning. Something in the air had shifted, a vibration of attention, focus, and urgency she had not felt in decades. She did not panic, she simply prepared, as one learned to do when danger approached. The F-22s closed in with lethal grace, the pilot's eyes scanning every inch of airspace. Captain noticed a flicker on his heads-up display, a code name flashing in bright letters. Hayes. Time seemed to stretch. Recognition struck like lightning. The woman in that commercial plane was no ordinary passenger. Years of training and briefings collided with reality. Protocols faltered under the weight of history. His wingman swallowed hard, eyes wide. This wasn't a hijacker, wasn't a rogue pilot. This was someone the United States had classified as a ghost, someone whose name had been spoken only in hushed tones in war rooms and intelligence briefings. His gaze drifted to the horizon, eyes calm, unafraid. She recognized the approaching jets not as threats but as echoes of her own past. Her fingers rested lightly on the armrest, a subtle readiness embedded in every fiber of her being. She had faced real danger, lethal situations, and now, decades later, her life had intersected with it once again, unexpectedly. The pilots hesitated, frozen, unsure whether to engage, escort, or retreat. The ordinary passenger plane had become a focal point of extraordinary attention and remained perfectly composed. Air traffic control buzzed with tension, reports flying faster than anyone could process. Every supervisor, analyst, and officer knew one thing: the name on the screen was not a threat, it was legend. Hayes had disappeared decades ago after operations classified so secret, even her colleagues scarcely remembered details. and now here she was, seated calmly among strangers, sipping coffee, unaware of the storm her identity had ignited in the skies above. The F-22s flanked the commercial plane, maintaining formation, engines a deafening roar yet strangely protective. The pilots' minds raced with history, protocol, and disbelief. Serene composure contrasted sharply with the military precision surrounding her. In mere minutes, the ordinary world of passengers aboard Flight 319 would intersect with the extraordinary legacy of a woman whose life had once moved in shadows. And Hayes, ever poised, awaited the unfolding, aware that the past and present had finally met. The F-22s closed in with lethal precision, slicing through the sky like silver arrows. Captain's eyes narrowed as he adjusted the HUD, tracking Flight 319 with exacting care. Engines screamed in controlled fury, wings cutting the sunlight, every maneuver executed flawlessly. His wingman mirrored him, equally tense, both pilots aware of the anomaly their instruments had flagged. Inside the cockpit, neither had seen a situation like this in years. A commercial airliner intercepted, its passenger manifest ordinary, except for one extraordinary name, Hayes. Seated by the window, noticed the shadow passing overhead. She lifted her gaze and saw two sleek jets glinting in the morning sun, moving in tight formation beside her plane. Passengers around her murmured, some pointing, some craning their necks, but she remained calm, almost serene. Her mind ticked through protocols she hadn't used in decades, subtle strategies and contingency plans, though she did not need them. This wasn't a threat. She knew instinctively that the pilots were reacting to something far beyond the ordinary. Captain's pulse quickened as the HUD blinked again. Hayes. The words froze him, an involuntary reaction to decades of training meeting reality. He had read the files, seen her code in simulations, heard stories whispered in command rooms, but he had never believed he would encounter her in the air, alive and unassuming in a commercial flight. His wingman's jaw tightened, eyes wide with disbelief. They hovered, engines whining, unsure how to proceed. Protocols faltered, the ordinary rules of engagement no longer applied. Inside the cabin, adjusted her scarf and leaned slightly against the window. The roar of the jets vibrated through the fuselage, but she did not flinch. A faint smile touched her lips. This was familiar, even if unexpected. For decades, she had faced situations like this, where timing, observation, and precision mattered more than brute force. Yet this was different. She was no longer on a mission, no longer responsible for lives beyond herself. The moment demanded patience, awareness, and the subtle assertion of calm authority. The F-22s mirrored each other's movements, engines slicing the air with deadly elegance. Captain communicated through secure channels, confirming the reading with command, but even command hesitated. The name meant something, everything, and the entire operation froze in uncertainty. They were trained for threats, rogues, hijackers, foreign intrusions, but Hayes was not a threat. She was history, classified, untouchable, and for the first time, a living legend had walked into their path. Passengers whispered and pointed, oblivious to the extraordinary event unfolding above. Sipped her coffee, glancing at the jets through the small oval window. Her expression betrayed no fear, only curiosity. Her training whispered in her mind, reminding her of observation, patience, and strategy, but this time it was enough to remain calm. The F-22s slowed slightly, holding formation, engines roaring like restrained predators. Captain's heart pounded. Decades of preparation collided with this single, surreal moment. A tense silence stretched across the sky. One wrong move, one misinterpreted signal, and disaster could unfold, yet remained composed, unassuming, ordinary in the eyes of the world, extraordinary to those who knew her name. The pilots hovered, watching, calculating, learning that sometimes the most dangerous and most revered individuals appeared where they least expected, quietly, inconspicuously, sipping coffee in row 9. The interception had begun as protocol, but it had transformed into recognition, a surreal collision of past and present, ordinary and legendary. Above the clouds, the two worlds met, a commercial passenger plane carrying a woman the world had almost forgotten, and two F-22s frozen in awe, engines screaming, wings outstretched in the sky. Hayes remained calm, a quiet center in a storm of reaction, as history recognized her in a moment that would remain classified, unspoken, yet unforgettable. Captain gripped the controls, every muscle taut, heart racing in disbelief. The HUD blinked her name again, Hayes. He exchanged a glance with his wingman. Recognition dawned simultaneously, sharp and surreal. This wasn't a threat, wasn't a hijacker or an intruder. This was her, the woman whose missions had been whispered in secure rooms, whose code name had haunted classified files, whose work had altered events in ways the public would never know. For the first time in decades, history and the present collided above Cedar Creek. Serene as ever sensed their scrutiny. She lifted her head slightly, meeting the faint shadows of the jets outside her window. Years of experience told her what she already knew. The pilots had recognized her, the pattern of their formation, the hesitation in their movements, the silent communication flashing across their HUDs. She didn't panic, didn't adjust her posture, didn't signal distress. She simply remained poised, sipping her coffee, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. This wasn't the first time her presence had frozen trained professionals in awe. It was simply the first time in public view. The wingman swallowed hard, voice barely audible over comms. "Captain, that's her, Hayes," exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of decades of secrecy pressing down. Protocol demanded caution, yet instinct screamed that any aggression was unnecessary. Hayes had been one of the most skilled operatives ever trained, a woman who had vanished from every system and every record, leaving only whispers in secure corridors. And now here she was, ordinary to the passengers, extraordinary to those who understood what her name meant. Inside the cabin, noticed a subtle shift in the hum of the plane, the vibrations through the fuselage, the precision with which the F-22s flanked her. She glanced at the pilot through the small cockpit window and registered nothing unusual from him, yet her instincts whispered that recognition had occurred. It was a familiar sensation, decades old, one she had experienced countless times, the silent acknowledgement of her reputation before anyone could speak a word. The pilots were frozen, caught between duty and awe, uncertainty and protocol. Air traffic control crackled, tension rising as ground command attempted to reconcile the anomaly. "Identification confirmed," a voice said carefully, measured, aware of the extraordinary nature of the moment. "Hayes alive and aboard Flight 319. His jaw tightened. The word alive carried weight he could feel physically. For decades she had been a ghost, an operative who had walked through danger and disappeared. He had never expected to see her in this context, ordinary, sipping coffee, calm in a commercial airline seat. It was a surreal collision of worlds. His calm betrayed no hint of the recognition she had triggered. She remained poised, steady, seemingly unaware of the chaos her mere presence had ignited. To the passengers around her, she was simply the quiet woman in row 9, reading a book, enjoying her coffee. To his wingman, she was legend, the operative who had once altered the course of missions that shaped the nation. Protocols had faltered, threat assessment had paused, history had entered their cockpit. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The engines roared, shadows danced on the fuselage, and the pilots hovered, aware of the immense weight carried by a single passenger. Hayes had walked unnoticed among ordinary people, yet in the sky above the clouds she had stopped trained warriors in their tracks. Her reputation, long buried and classified, had resurfaced in a way neither the world nor she had expected. Recognition was complete, absolute, and the extraordinary presence of one woman transformed the ordinary flight into something unforgettable. Sipped her coffee, eyes on the horizon, serene, aware that the world had briefly held its breath. Above, the F-22s waited, engines screaming, wings taut with readiness as the pilots processed the reality. She was no threat, she was Hayes, and the skis had recognized her. Mind drifted, as it often did when moments of tension stirred memories she had long buried. She remembered the cold, metallic corridors of overseas operations, lights flickering, voices muted in secure channels, and the hum of machines transmitting coded messages across continents. Each mission had demanded precision beyond human endurance, split-second decisions that determined life or death for countless people. There had been moments of triumph, of quiet heroism unseen by the public, and moments of bitter betrayal where even allies had turned against her under political pressure. She had survived it all, yet never boasted. In her flashbacks, saw herself in the heart of conflicts, navigating labyrinthine intelligence networks, deciphering cryptic codes, and maneuvering through perilous environments with unwavering poise. She remembered nights spent in abandoned warehouses, exchanging critical information with operatives whose faces she might never see again. The lives she had saved were too many to count. The lives she had indirectly ended haunted her only in fleeting professional remorse. She had been trained to act without hesitation, to carry the weight of consequences she might never witness. It was the life she had lived before Cedar Creek, before quiet mornings and predictable routines. Recalled the last mission before she vanished into anonymity. The stakes had been impossibly high, a covert operation to dismantle a network that threatened national security. The odds were against her. Plans failed, allies faltered, but she succeeded. With the skill and cunning that would later earn her legendary status, she had maneuvered through impossible scenarios, leaving only whispers of her existence behind. After that mission, she chose disappearance over accolades. She wanted ordinary, mundane, the rhythm of a life untouched by chaos. Cedar Creek became her sanctuary, a place to reinvent herself, to live without the constant shadow of danger. Yet even as she had settled into quiet anonymity, her training remained a living presence within her. Her eyes, her ears, her instincts had not dulled. They only waited for signals her ordinary neighbors could never perceive. The hum of engines, the subtle vibrations of the cabin, the precise positioning of the F-22s, it all registered. Her mind cataloged and processed each detail with practiced efficiency, preparing for decisions she might never need to make. Ordinary flight, she reminded herself, yet her past had returned, brushing against her calm world like a ghost in the wind. Also recalled the moments of camaraderie and trust built over years with operatives she would never see again. The bonds had been unspoken but unbreakable. Those days had demanded sacrifices she could never explain, leaving her public life devoid of stories worth telling. No one knew her victories, no one knew the breadth of her expertise. And yet that expertise had not diminished, it only lay dormant, waiting for the right circumstances. And now the F-22 pilots above her, frozen in recognition, were the first to feel the residual power of her presence in decades. She let herself smile faintly, the faint curve of her lips a mixture of irony and nostalgia. The world had long forgotten Hayes, but it had not forgotten her skills. They lingered like shadows, quietly, invisibly, shaping reactions and decisions even in her absence. The ordinary passengers aboard Flight 319 remained oblivious, yet history and legend had converged in their midst. His calm belied the extraordinary life etched into her mind, the life that had silently commanded respect, fear, and awe among those who knew her true name. As the jets flanked her plane, engines screaming, wings taut with precision, Hayes reflected on her life's duality, ordinary today, extraordinary in memory, capable of commanding silence even from the most disciplined pilots. The flashbacks faded, leaving her poised in the present, aware that the sky itself recognized the weight of her legacy. Ordinary and extraordinary had collided, and she was at the center, serene as ever, quietly legendary. The roar of the F-22s reverberated through the cabin of Flight 319, yet Hayes remained calm, sipping her coffee as if nothing extraordinary was occurring outside. The jets flanked the airliner with lethal precision, their engines humming a tense harmony that resonated through the fuselage. Passengers murmured, pointing to the sleek military planes cutting through the sky, but none guessed the truth. To them, it was routine protocol, a spectacle of military presence. To Captain and his wingman, it was far from ordinary. They had recognized her, and their mission had transformed from interception to escort. The F-22s maintained formation, the pilot's fingers hovering over controls yet restrained. Every movement was deliberate, precise, yet guided by awe and caution. Ground command monitored the situation with bated breath. His identity had been confirmed, classified intelligence verifying that the woman in row 9 was indeed Hayes' operative, legend, ghost. Protocols had initially demanded caution, possibly engagement, but reality had dictated otherwise. She was not a threat. She was history, alive and present before their eyes. The tension that had gripped them lifted slightly, replaced by measured reverence. Observed the jet's maneuvers with quiet curiosity. She had trained countless agents, worked alongside military personnel in high-stakes operations, yet even she had not expected such a surreal reunion decades later, in the air above civilian skis. The pilots were professionals, disciplined and skilled, yet in her presence, their caution bordered on awe. She understood without speaking. She had lived this moment countless times in classified scenarios, though never with ordinary passengers watching obliviously. Her calm radiated authority, commanding the scene without any gesture or word. Passengers adjusted in their seats, unaware of the gravity beyond the windows. Children pressed their faces to the glass, adults murmured about military precision, pilots and flight attendants exchanged polite nods. Serene presence anchored the moment. She remained composed, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary only to those who knew her past. Captain stole a glance at his wingman, eyes reflecting disbelief and relief. They had expected a possible threat, a hijacking, a rogue maneuver, but instead they found a woman who had already faced unimaginable danger and walked through it with unflinching poise. The jets gradually guided the airliner along a direct path toward Washington. D.C. Air Traffic Control breathed quietly in relief as reports confirmed her identity and safety. The escort's presence reassured the pilots, yet they remained vigilant. Hayes, seated in row 9, did not need the reassurance. She understood the purpose and responded accordingly, maintaining a quiet composure that belied decades of expertise. Her subtle nod to herself acknowledged the surreal orchestration. History had intersected with the present, ordinary with extraordinary, in perfect, tense harmony. As the plane descended toward the city, the F-22s eased slightly into formation, signaling readiness without aggression. The pilots reflected on the improbable scenario. A woman who had been presumed lost to classified operations had reappeared in a commercial flight, unassuming yet commanding complete deference. His calm, methodical aura guided them indirectly, a silent authority grounded in decades of experience. They escorted her safely, engines screaming, wings taut with tension, aware that any misstep could compromise both perception and safety. yet reassured by the unmistakable presence of mastery beside them. Gazed out at the horizon, feeling the wind of altitude and freedom brushing past the windows. Ordinary passengers saw nothing extraordinary beyond the sleek aircraft outside. Extraordinary history passed quietly among them. In moments, the escort would release the flight into civilian airspace, yet the pilots knew this encounter would linger in memory, a silent testament to human capability and legend. This ordinary life remained intact, yet above the clouds, the extraordinary had returned briefly, acknowledging her presence in awe and precision. The airliner continued steadily, engines humming, shadows of the F-22s slicing the sky alongside. Hayes remained seated, serene, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in reality. The skis had recognized her, history had paused in her presence. And as Washington drew closer, the pilots exhaled collectively, tension dissolving yet reverence remaining. A legend had passed among them, unnoticed by the world, yet unforgettable to those who had glimpsed her true name. The extraordinary had returned briefly, then released its hold, leaving calm in its wake. The wheels of Flight 319 kissed the tarmac of Washington Dulles International Airport with a soft thud, a gentle punctuation to an extraordinary journey. Hayes remained calm, hands folded over her small purse, eyes forward. Around her, passengers clutched bags, whispered to companions, and stretched after the long flight. Few noticed the lingering shadows of the F-22s that had escorted them through the skis, their presence now fading into memory. Herself did not glance at them, though she felt the echoes of their engines, a hum that seemed to linger in her bones. Ordinary life was calling. Exiting the plane was met with the cool autumn air brushing against her face. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, bustling and indifferent. She wheeled her suitcase calmly down the jetway, weaving through the crowd of travelers who noticed nothing remarkable about the quiet woman with the steady gait. The world had been briefly aware of her, yet none could grasp the full weight of the moment. Had lived in the shadow of extraordinary missions for decades, yet now she walked as any ordinary woman would, her presence deceptively unremarkable. A taxi awaited at the curb, polished and professional, driver nodding politely as she settled in. Gave the address, her voice soft and steady, the hum of engines beneath her reflecting her own composed rhythm. Outside, the city moved in its usual chaos, oblivious to the extraordinary convergence that had just occurred above. His thoughts drifted briefly to the pilots, their tense formation, their hesitant awe. She allowed herself a small, private smile, an acknowledgement of the surreal meeting of ordinary life and extraordinary history in the skis. As the taxi navigated toward her destination, reflected on her dual existence. Ordinary, she reminded herself, was a choice. Cedar Creek had offered sanctuary, anonymity, and peace, a life far removed from high-stakes intelligence operations. Yet that past remained, etched in her instincts, decisions, and the calm she exuded in moments that would unsettle almost anyone else. Today had reminded her that the extraordinary never truly left. It simply waited for recognition, often arriving when least expected. Even a simple woman in row 9 could command the respect of history itself. Arriving at her modest apartment, stepped inside, the familiar smell of aged wood and herbal tea greeting her like an old friend. She placed her suitcase gently by the door and moved to the kitchen to brew herself a fresh cup of tea. The kettle hissed and whistled, filling the small space with warmth. She allowed herself to relax fully, sitting by the window with the tea in hand, gazing out at the cityscape. To the world, she was merely a woman enjoying a quiet evening, but the echoes of the extraordinary hummed softly beneath her calm exterior. Evening fell, draping the streets in soft shadows and golden light, reflected on the flight, the interception, and the subtle awe she had inspired without even standing or speaking. She knew that the pilots would recount the encounter, that intelligence command would log every detail, yet the public would remain blissfully unaware. She had passed through both ordinary and extraordinary without changing a thing. Her life's duality remained intact, serene and anonymous on the surface, quietly legendary beneath. Night deepened, prepared for bed, a sense of satisfaction settling over her. Ordinary life had prevailed once more, yet the extraordinary had brushed close, a reminder of the life she had once led. She allowed herself a brief smile, appreciating the irony and the calm that came from mastery, experience, and the quiet knowledge that her past remained untouchable. Hayes had walked through history and returned to her quiet life, ordinary to the world, but forever extraordinary to those who knew her name. She switched off the lights, curling into the comfort of her bed. Outside, the city hummed with oblivious activity, unaware that a legend had walked among them, sip by sip, step by step, drifted into sleep, serene, poised, untouchable. The extraordinary had passed by, acknowledged and respected, and now she rested, knowing that ordinary life once chosen could coexist with the legend she truly was. And in that peaceful silence she remained, quiet, unseen, and undeniably remarkable.